The Duskwolf pup was 3 days from dying when Marin Silt found it wedged beneath the collapsed root system of a ghost fern, 60 kilometers from the nearest settlement and 1,400 light-years from the planet where he had been born. He heard it before he saw it, a sound like wet fabric tearing, rhythmic and weak, rising from a hollow in the ground that his survey drone had flagged as a thermal anomaly. Marin had been cataloging predator migration routes along the Veshan Reach for 11 months, sleeping in a one-man shelter pod that smelled like recycled air and field rations, and his ears had learned to sort the wilderness into categories: wind, water, animal, threat. This sound was animal but wrong, too fast, too thin. The breathing pattern of something small, whose lungs were filling with fluid. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the hollow and pushed the root mat aside with his bare hands. The fern's root system was dense and fibrous, woven tight enough to trap a juvenile predator but not tight enough to kill it quickly. Below the mat, in a pocket of compressed earth no larger than a supply crate, a Duskwolf pup lay on its side with its ribs showing through the short silver-black fur. It was young, 8 weeks, maybe 10. Its eyes were open storm gray, enormous in the narrow skull, and they tracked Marin's face with the fixed attention of an animal that had been watching the only patch of light above it for days, waiting for something to appear. Marin knew Duskwolves. He had spent 3 of his 16 years in the field studying them. He knew their pack dynamics, their vocal range, their territorial marking behavior, their predation strategies. He knew that an adult Duskwolf stood chest-high on a Kalori male and weighed twice as much, that their jaw pressure exceeded anything in the colonial bestiary for quadrupedal predators, that their hunting formation, the Pinceran drive, had been studied by Kalori military tacticians for its efficiency. He knew that Duskwolves were classified as a Tier 1 apex organism on every colonial world where they had been found, and that the standard handling protocol for an encounter was: do not engage, mark the coordinates, retreat upwind, report. He also knew that this pup was going to die in this hole if he left it. Marin Silt was 43 years old, born on a backwater colony world called Dalton's Reach, educated in xenobiology at the Terran Institute on Callisto, and employed loosely, since his funding had been cut twice and his department head had stopped returning his messages 6 months ago, as a wildlife biologist for the Interstellar Conservation Directorate. He had no family, no permanent address, and no particular ambition beyond the work itself. He was the kind of man who disappeared into frontier territories for years at a time, and returned with data volumes that nobody read and observations that nobody funded. He was also the kind of man who could not walk away from a dying animal. He reached into the hollow, got both hands under the pup's body, and lifted. It weighed almost nothing. Its fur was matted with mud and its own waste, and he could feel every rib and the ridge of its spine through the thin skin. Its heartbeat was rapid and irregular, the tachycardia of dehydration and early organ stress. When his hands closed around its torso, the pup did something that the bestiary said Duskwolves never did with non-pack members. It pressed its head against his wrist and closed its eyes. Marin carried the pup back to his shelter pod. He cleaned it with warm water from his field kit, syringe-fed it an electrolyte solution cut with protein extract, and built a warming nest from his spare thermal blanket in the corner of the pod. The pup drank 30 milliliters, shivered violently for 10 minutes, and then fell asleep with its nose pressed against his ankle. He should have reported it. Protocol required any wildlife biologist who made physical contact with a Tier 1 predator to file an immediate incident report with the Regional Wildlife Authority. The report would trigger an assessment team, which would trigger a containment evaluation, which would, in the case of a juvenile apex predator found in distress, almost certainly trigger a euthanization order. Marin did not file the report. He named the pup Wick. The Veshan Reach was not a place that forgave carelessness. It was a continental shelf of volcanic basalt and ancient forest, 3,000 kilometers long and 200 wide, running along the equatorial ridge of Kelos IV like a spine. The forest was old, the ghost ferns had been carbon dated at 6,000 years, and the ecosystem it supported was dense, competitive, and unforgiving. Dusk wolves held the apex position, but they shared the canopy with a dozen other predator species, including ridge raptors, venom crawlers, and the massive, slow-moving stone bears that denned in the lava tubes below the forest floor. Marin had chosen the Veshan Reach because it was the last place on Kelos IV where duskwolf packs still operated at pre-colonial density. The Kelori, the planet's native population, a broad-shouldered, amber-skinned species with four-fingered hands and a deep cultural wariness of the wilderness, had pushed the duskwolves out of every lowland territory over the past century. The Reach was their holdout. 6 packs, totaling an estimated 90 to 100 individuals, ranging across a territory so vast and vertical that the Kelori military patrols avoided it entirely. Marin had spent 11 months mapping their movements. He knew the pack territories, the denning sites, the seasonal migration corridors. He knew which pack was which by their howl signatures. The Veshan duskwolf howl was a 3-part harmonic that carried across 20 kilometers of forest canopy, and each pack had a distinctive tonal fingerprint that Marin could identify at distance. What he did not know, what the bestiary did not cover, what no Kelori or human researcher had ever documented, was what happened when a duskwolf pup imprinted on a human. Wick's recovery took 9 days. During those 9 days, Marin learned 3 things that reordered everything he thought he knew about duskwolf behavioral science. The first thing was that duskwolf pups vocalized constantly, not the howl that came later with physical maturity. The pup vocalization was a complex, shifting repertoire of whines, clicks, huffs, and a low-frequency rumble that Marin felt in his sternum before he heard it with his ears. Within 3 days, he had identified 17 distinct vocalizations, each tied to a specific context: hunger, thirst, cold, warmth, the need to urinate, the need to sleep, the detection of a sound outside the pod, the desire for physical contact, and most frequently the simple announcement of his location relative to Marin's body. The pup tracked him. Every movement, every shift of weight, every step from one side of the pod to the other. Its storm-gray eyes followed him with the precision of a targeting system, and when he moved beyond arm's reach, the vocalizations shifted to a higher register that Marin came to recognize as distress, not pain, but the anxiety of separation. The pup wanted him close. The second thing was that duskwolf intelligence operated on a level that the bestiary had not even attempted to measure. On day 4, Marin set his water canister on the floor of the pod while he adjusted the shelter's ventilation system. The canister tipped. Water spilled across the floor. Wick watched the water spread, tracked its movement with his eyes, and then with deliberate precision pushed his thermal blanket into the path of the flow, damming it. Marin stared at the pup. Wick stared back. The pup's tail, short, thick, expressive, gave a single slow wag. On day 5, Marin left the pod to check his perimeter sensors. When he returned, Wick had dragged the field kits carrying strap to the door and was sitting beside it, waiting. The strap was the only object in the pod that Marin touched every time he left and every time he returned. Wick had not been taught to fetch. He had observed a pattern and acted on it. The third thing, the thing that changed everything, happened on day 7. Marin was outside the pod, recalibrating a sensor mast, when Wick began the distress vocalization. Not the mild separation anxiety. The high, sharp, rapid-fire call that Marin had not heard before. He dropped the calibration tool and ran. Wick was standing at the pod's entrance, on legs that had been too weak to support him 4 days ago, and his posture was wrong. His body was low, his ears were flat against his skull, and the fur along his spine had risen into a ridge that caught the light. He was staring into the tree line, and the distress call was not directed at Marin. It was directed at something in the forest. Marin followed the pup's eye line. The ghost fern canopy was thick enough to block direct sunlight, but the gaps between the trunks provided sightlines of 15 to 20 meters. At the edge of one of those sightlines, standing motionless in the filtered green light, was an adult dusk wolf. Female, full-grown. 80 kilograms of muscle and jaw and the specific, coiled stillness of a predator that was deciding whether to charge. Her eyes, the same storm gray as Wick's, were locked on Marin. Not on the pup, on him, the threat. The distress call made sense now. Wick was not calling for Marin. He was calling to the dusk wolf. And the message, as clear as any words could have been, was, "This one is mine. Do not." Marin did not move. He had spent 16 years in the field and he knew the mathematics of an apex predator encounter. If the animal had decided to attack, it would already be moving. The fact that this dusk wolf was standing still meant she was assessing, weighing the threat against the cost. And something was disrupting her calculation, something that was making the standard predator-prey equation return an answer she did not expect. The something was Wick. The pup was positioned between Marin and the dusk wolf, not behind Marin where a frightened juvenile would shelter, between them. His distress call shifted, dropping in pitch, lengthening in interval, becoming something that Marin would later spend weeks analyzing on his recording equipment. It was not a distress call anymore. It was a declaration. The adult dusk wolf's posture changed. Her ears came forward. Her weight shifted off her rear legs out of the pre-charged stance. Her head tilted, the gesture Marin had seen in Wick when the pup was processing new information. She looked at the pup, she looked at Marin. She looked at the pup again. Then she sat down. She sat down in the forest 20 meters from a human being, and she stayed. Her eyes tracked Marin with a steady, evaluative focus, but the killing tension had left her body. She was watching, waiting, processing. Marin exhaled. Slowly, without breaking eye contact with the dusk wolf, he lowered himself to one knee. Wick trotted to him immediately, pressing against his leg, the distress vocalization fading to the low contact rumble that meant safety, here mine. The dusk wolf watched this. She watched Marin's hand come down to rest on Wick's back, fingers finding the spot at the base of the skull where the pup's muscles knotted when he was tense. She watched Wick lean into the touch, his spine softening, his tail giving that single slow wag. She stayed for 47 minutes. Marin timed it. Then she stood, turned, and vanished into the canopy without a sound. That night Marin found tracks around his shelter pod, 4 sets, different sizes. The pack had come to assess the human who had their pup. They had not attacked. Over the following weeks, the dynamic shifted in ways that Marin documented with the obsessive precision of a man who understood he was witnessing something that had never been recorded. He filled data volumes. He ran his audio recordings through every analytical framework he had. He set up camera traps in a perimeter around his shelter and captured footage that made him replay it 3 times before he believed it. The pack was watching him. Not hunting, not circling, not establishing a territorial claim on his campsite. Watching. 3 to 5 adults rotating in shifts, maintaining a loose perimeter at a distance of 40 to 60 meters from his shelter pod. They were visible on his cameras every day, and increasingly they were visible to his naked eye standing in the tree line, sitting on rocky outcrops, lying in the shade of ghost fern trunks. Always watching. Wick knew they were there. He would stand at the pod entrance every morning and produce a low, modulated howl, not the full adult harmonic, but a juvenile approximation that carried the same tonal fingerprint. The pack responded. From the tree line, from the ridgeline, from the deep forest, the 3-part harmony would rise and fold around Wick's smaller voice like a river absorbing a tributary. They were talking, the pup and the pack, every morning, and Marin was in the middle of the conversation. He began to understand the vocabulary. Not through linguistic analysis. Duskwolf vocalizations were too complex for the translation algorithms he had access to, but through context and repetition. The long, low tone that the dominant female used when she appeared at the tree line, acknowledgement, here. The rapid clicking sequence that preceded a shift change among the watchers, rotation. The deep, chest-resonant rumble that the entire pack produced in unison at dusk, settling, safe. And the sound Wick made when Marin was near the contact rumble, the tail wag, the press of skull against wrist, mine, pack, stay. Marin was being translated. Wick was telling the pack what Marin was, and the pack was deciding whether to believe him. 5 weeks after the first encounter with the adult female, Marin took the step that violated every protocol he had ever been trained on. He walked toward the tree line with Wick at his side. Not cautiously, not with the slow, measured approach of a researcher maintaining safe distance. He walked the way Wick walked, steady, unhurried, his body relaxed, his hands at his sides. The dominant female was at her usual position, 40 meters out, sitting on a flat rock that overlooked the approach to his shelter. She saw him coming. Her ears tracked forward. Her body did not tense. Marin stopped at 20 meters. Wick trotted ahead, crossed the remaining distance, and pressed his head against the female's flank. The female lowered her muzzle to the pup's skull and produced the acknowledgement tone, a sound so deep it vibrated the rock under Marin's boots. Then she looked at Marin. He crouched slowly, deliberately. He placed his hands on his knees and he waited. The female stood. She stepped off the rock. She crossed the 20 meters between them with the fluid, unhurried gait of an animal that was not stalking, not charging, not threatening, an animal that was approaching a member of its own social group for the first time. She stopped a meter from Marin's crouched body. She was enormous this close. Her head was at his eye level, her shoulders wider than his, her breath warm and carrying the copper-end forest scent that he had come to associate with healthy duskwolves. Her eyes were steady, searching his face with an intelligence that made the hair on his arms stand up. She extended her muzzle and touched his forehead. The contact lasted 3 seconds. Marin felt the damp of her nose, the warmth of her breath, the fine tremor in the muscles of her jaw. Then she pulled back, turned, and walked to the rock. She sat down. She looked at him. Marin understood. He understood it the way you understand a handshake, a nod across a room, a door held open. The gesture was not dominance. It was not submission. It was recognition. He had been accepted. After that, the perimeter collapsed. Not all at once. Duskwolves were cautious by nature, and the pack had spent generations learning that the Kelori were threats. But Marin was not Kelori. He did not carry weapons. He did not set traps. He did not smell of chemical propellant or metal or the ozone-sharp anxiety that the Kelori patrol units radiated when they entered Duskwolf territory. He smelled of field rations and thermal blankets and Wick, who slept against his chest every night and whose scent had permeated every surface he owned. He smelled like pack. The first to close distance was a yearling male Marin designated Breaker, a rangy, curious adolescent who had been watching Marin from the tree line with an intensity that bordered on academic. Breaker began following Marin on his survey routes, maintaining a 10-meter buffer at first, then 5, then 2. Within a week, Breaker was walking beside Marin with the easy, shoulder-to-shoulder cadence of a colleague. Then came Torsa, the female Marin identified as the pack's primary hunter, smaller than the dominant female, faster, with a scarred muzzle and the specific, wound-tight energy of a predator that had survived fights it should not have. Torsa did not approach Marin. She approached Wick. She began grooming the pup during Marin's morning data collection sessions, her tongue working through Wick's fur with maternal efficiency while Wick squirmed and protested, and eventually went boneless with contentment. Then the others. One by one, over the course of 3 weeks, every adult in the pack closed the perimeter. They did not crowd. They did not demand. They simply reduced the distance between themselves and Marin until the distance stopped meaning anything, and the territory around his shelter pod became indistinguishable from a pack denning site. Marin realized what was happening when he woke one morning to find 4 adult duskwolves sleeping in a ring around his shelter pod. He lay in his sleeping pad with Wick draped across his legs and listened to the breathing of 80-kilogram apex predators, arranged in the exact defensive perimeter that the bestiary described as the pack's nighttime protection formation. They were guarding him. He was not their handler. He was not their trainer. He was not their researcher anymore, though he kept filling data volumes out of professional habit. He was their pack father. The quiet, steady, unarmed human who had pulled a dying pup out of a hole and fed it electrolytes with a syringe, and who had earned the trust of every predator on the Veshan Reach by doing the one thing no one else had tried. He had stayed. The Kalori found out about Marin's situation when one of his perimeter cameras recorded footage that his uplink system automatically transmitted to the Interstellar Conservation Directorate's regional server. The footage showed Marin sitting on the ground outside his shelter pod, eating a field ration, with Wick in his lap and 7 adult duskwolves arranged in a loose semicircle around him. One of the adults was chewing on the handle of his survey drone's controller. Another was lying on its back with its legs in the air, while Marin scratched its belly with his free hand. The footage reached the ICD regional office, was flagged by an automated content filter as a potential human-wildlife safety violation, and was forwarded to the Kalori Colonial Wildlife Authority. The Wildlife Authority forwarded it to the Colonial Security Directorate. The Security Directorate looked at the footage, looked at the classification file on duskwolves, looked at the footage again, and sent a message to Marin's emergency contact frequency that read, "Immediate extraction authorized. Confirm status, are you under duress?" Marin read the message. He looked at Wick, who was sleeping on his feet. He looked at the dominant female, who was sitting on her rock, watching the forest with the calm vigilance of a queen surveying her domain. He replied, "Negative, conducting field research. Do not send extraction team. The wolves will not understand an armed approach." The Security Directorate sent the extraction team. They came in a standard Kalori patrol transport, a heavy, armored vehicle with 6 crew, and a weapons complement designed for frontier enforcement. Commander Dren Sarath, a career security officer with 18 years in frontier operations and exactly 0 experience with human-wildlife biologists, led the team. His briefing file described Marin as a potentially compromised ICD researcher engaged in unauthorized contact with a Tier 1 predator population. The recommended approach was standard wildlife hazard containment: tranquilize the animals, extract the human, file the incident. Commander Sarath's team reached Marin's shelter pod at mid-morning. They dismounted from the transport, weapons out, body armor sealed, and formed up in the 2x3 patrol formation that Kalori frontier units trained on. The forest went silent. Marin heard the transport from 2 kilometers away. He was standing outside his pod, packing sensor equipment for a survey run, and the engine noise was so alien to the Veshan Reach soundscape that every living thing in the canopy reacted. The bird analogs stopped calling. The insects fell quiet, and the duskwolves, all of them, every adult in the pack, materialized out of the forest like smoke forming into bodies. They gathered around Marin, not panicked, not aggressive, gathered with the calm, deliberate positioning of a military unit forming up around a command post. The dominant female took the center-left position, her body angled to cover the approach vector. Breaker took the right flank. Torsa dropped low in the scrub to the rear, invisible unless you knew where to look. Wick pressed against Marin's leg and produced the vocalization that Marin had heard only once before the declaration. The sound that said, "This one is mine." "Easy," Marin said. "Not a command, a tone, a frequency." The word itself was meaningless, the vocal register carried the information. Low, steady, unhurried. No threat, I am calm, we are safe. The pack did not relax, but they did not escalate. They held their positions and waited. Commander Sareth's team came into view through the tree line. 6 Kalari in full tactical gear, pulse weapons raised, moving in standard approach formation. They were trained, competent, and completely unprepared for what they saw. 12 Duskwolves. 12 adult Tier 1 apex predators, standing in a formation that the Colonial Security Directorate's tactical manual would later describe as a textbook defensive perimeter executed with greater precision than any trained unit on record. Standing around a single human male in dirty field clothes who was scratching a Duskwolf pup behind the ears. Sareth stopped walking. His team stopped with him. Through his tactical visor, the threat assessment system was painting every Duskwolf in red, the maximum threat marker that the system used for organisms capable of lethal engagement. Every marker was red. The entire clearing was a sea of red markers with a single blue dot in the center. The blue dot was Marin. "Dr. Silt," Sareth said, his voice carried by the external speaker because his visor was sealed and his hands were not leaving his weapon. "We're here to extract you. Step away from the animals." Marin did not step away. He placed his hand on the dominant female's shoulder. She turned her head toward the sound of Sareth's voice. Her lips pulled back from her teeth, not fully, not the pre-attack display, but enough to show the jaw structure. Enough to show that the weapons the Kalori carried were irrelevant to the conversation she was having with the universe. "Commander," Marin said, and his voice was the voice he used with the pack low, even carrying no stress signature that the wolves would read as danger. "I need you to do 3 things. Lower your weapons, remove your helmets, and sit down." Sareth stared at him. "Excuse me." "Your weapons are making them nervous. Your sealed armor is making them read you as non-biological, which means unknown, which means threat. And standing over them at full height is a dominance display that the mature female is about 20 seconds from answering." Sareth looked at the dominant female. The dominant female looked at Sareth. Her ears were forward. Her weight was shifting to her rear legs. Marin knew what that shift meant, and so, apparently, did Sareth's threat assessment system, because the tactical visor began flashing a priority warning. "Weapons down," Sareth ordered. His team hesitated. "Now." 6 pulse weapons lowered. The dominant female's ears tracked the movement. Her weight redistributed fractionally, imperceptibly to anyone who was not Marin. "Helmets," Marin said. Sareth unsealed his visor. The air of the Veshan Reach hit his face, warm, humid, thick with the petan copper smell of the forest. He looked at Marin with the expression of a man who was recalculating every assumption he had walked in with. "Sit down," Marin said. "Slowly, cross your legs if you can. You want to be lower than they are. It signals non-competition." Sareth sat down. His team, after a pause during which several of them reconsidered their career choices, sat down with him. The pack watched. 12 sets of storm-gray eyes tracked the Kalori as they moved from standing armed threatening to sitting unarmed vulnerable. The tension in the clearing did not dissipate, it restructured. The dominant female's posture shifted from defensive to evaluative. She looked at the seated Kalori the way she had looked at Marin 5 weeks ago, assessing, weighing, deciding. Wick trotted forward. He walked directly to Commander Sareth, sniffed the man's knee, sniffed his hand, and then sat down beside him with the casual possession of a pup who had decided that this new person belonged to the same category as the man in the pod. Sareth looked down at the Duskwolf pup sitting at his knee. He looked up at Marin. His face was doing the thing that Marin had seen on every face that encountered the pack for the first time, the slow rearrangement of understanding, the old framework cracking, the new one not yet formed. "They're not aggressive," Sareth said, and it was not a statement but a realization. They're not tame either, Marin said. They're making a decision about you, right now, based on your posture, your breathing, your scent, and whether the pup signals that you're safe. The pup decides. The pup translates. He knows me. He knows I'm not afraid of you. He's telling the pack that you're pack adjacent, not family, but not a threat. If he's wrong, the pack will correct the error. If he's right, you'll be fine. Soreth sat very still. Wick leaned against his knee and produced the contact trumble. The sound vibrated through Soreth's armor plating and into his bones. What does that sound mean? Soreth asked. Marin smiled. It was a small smile, tired, private. The smile of a man who had spent 11 months alone in the forest and had forgotten what it felt like to explain the most important thing in his life to another person. It means stay, he said. Soreth did not extract Marin that day. He filed a report instead, a report that deviated so sharply from his operational mandate that his commanding officer called him personally to ask if he had suffered a head injury. Negative, sir, Soreth said, but I need a behavioral assessment team, not a containment unit. What Dr. Silt has out here is not a wildlife hazard. I don't have the vocabulary for what it is, but it is not what we were told. The behavioral assessment team arrived 4 days later. 3 Kalori xenobiologists and a human ethologist named Dr. Pelcavi, who had been working on Dusk wolf population dynamics from a satellite observation post, and who had never been within 10 kilometers of a live specimen. Cavi was 56, gray-haired, deliberate in her movements, and possessed of the specific, unshakable calm that came from 30 years of fieldwork in places where calmness was the only thing between you and a casket. She took one look at Marin set up the shelter pod, the sensor arrays, the dusk wolf tracks overlapping human boot prints in the mud around the camp, and said, "How long?" 11 weeks since I found the pup, 5 since the pack accepted me. Accepted. She tested the word like she was checking it for cracks. They sleep around my shelter. They walk with me on survey runs. The dominant female lets me touch her. The yearling male follows me like a shadow. The pup sleeps on my chest. I have 17 months of contextual vocalization data and 8 weeks of behavioral footage that rewrites the species chapter in the bestiary. Cavi looked at the tree line. 2 dusk wolves were visible, a mated pair, lying in the shade, watching the camp with the drowsy attention of animals who were off duty but alert. "Show me," she said. Marin showed her. Over 5 days, he walked Cavi into the pack's routine: the morning howl, the hunting formations, the grooming sessions, the territorial patrols. He introduced her to the pack the way Wick had introduced him, slowly, through proximity and scent, letting the wolves close the distance at their own pace. Cavi was good. She moved the way Marin moved, low, deliberate, non-threatening. Her breathing was controlled. Her voice, when she used it, was pitched in the range that the dusk wolves responded to best. Low register, even cadence, no spikes. On day 3, Wick sat in her lap. Cavi looked down at the pup with an expression that Marin recognized, because he had worn it himself, the expression of a scientist whose entire theoretical framework had just been demolished by a puppy. "This is unprecedented," she said. "I know." "No, Marin, you don't understand. I've been studying this species for 12 years from orbit. Everything we have says they're non-social with external species. Every interaction model predicts lethal engagement at close range. The colonial government spent 40 million credits on a duskwolf management program built on the assumption that these animals cannot coexist with sapient populations." She paused. "And you've got one asleep in your lap." "I didn't train him, I just didn't leave." Cavi stared at him. Then she did something that surprised them both. She laughed. Not loud, not long, but genuine. The laugh of a woman who had just realized that the most important discovery of her career was also the simplest. "You just didn't leave," she repeated. "That's it, that's the methodology. Consistency, calm, no weapons, no containment." Just presence. Just presence. Cavi shook her head. Do you know what the management program recommends for a researcher who finds a juvenile apex predator in distress? Euthanization order. Euthanization order. And here you are, 12 weeks later, sitting in the middle of the most complete human duskwolf integration ever recorded, because you fed a dying puppy electrolytes and stayed. The staying was the hard part. Cavi spent her remaining days conducting structured observations. She watched Marin run a tracking exercise with Breaker and two subordinate adults, the wolves following scent trails that Marin had laid the previous day, their coordination so precise that Cavi's ethological framework had to invent new terminology to describe it. She watched the evening settling ritual, when the pack gathered in a loose circle around the shelter pod, and the three-part howl rose into the canopy and Wick pressed against Marin's leg and added his juvenile voice to the chorus. She watched Marin handle a stone bear encounter. The stone bear appeared on the ridge above the camp at midday, a massive, slow-moving herbivore-turned-omnivore that denned in the lava tubes and occasionally wandered into duskwolf territory during foraging season. Stone bears were not predators, but they were large enough and armored enough that even duskwolf packs gave them a wide corridor. The colonial bestiary listed 4 confirmed duskwolf fatalities from stone bear encounters, all juveniles who had strayed too close to a denning female. This one was a male, 400 kilograms of volcanic rock-colored hide, head lowered, moving along the ridge toward the camp with the mindless determination of an animal following a scent to food. The pack reacted. The dominant female rose from her rock, her body dropping into the alert stance. Breaker and 2 subordinates materialized at the perimeter, flanking positions, their bodies low and their rumbles building. They did not charge. Stone bears were not the kind of threat you solved with speed. They were the kind of threat you solved with noise. But before the pack's deterrence chorus could build to full volume, Marin stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms. He walked to the edge of the camp, picked up a rock the size of his fist and threw it. Not at the stone bear, at the ground 3 meters in front of it. The rock cracked against basalt with a sharp, percussive report that echoed off the ridge walls. The stone bear stopped. Its small, deep-set eyes found Marin. It huffed the exploratory threat assessment that stone bears used before deciding whether to charge or retreat. Marin threw a second rock, same spot, same sharp crack. The stone bear huffed again, reconsidered the mathematics of the situation, the noise, the standing figure, the dozen duskwolves visible at the clearing's edge, and turned. It walked back along the ridge with the unhurried dignity of an animal that had not been defeated, merely redirected. The pack's deterrence chorus faded to individual rumbles, then to silence. The dominant female settled back onto her rock. Breaker shook himself and trotted to Marin's side, his tail carrying the slow wag that meant the tension was discharged. Cavi had watched the entire sequence from the pod entrance, her recording equipment running. "You didn't let the pack handle it," she said. The stone bear wasn't a predator threat. It was a navigation problem. The pack's response would have been a full deterrence display, vocalization, crest deployment, a possible charge. That's energy spent, stress accumulated, and a signal to every other animal within earshot that this territory is contested. One rock solved it quieter. "You managed the pack stress." "I managed the situation. The pack trusts me to read threats accurately. If I'd panicked, they'd have escalated. If I'd ignored it, they'd have handled it their way. I read it as low threat and responded accordingly, and they calibrated off my response." Cavi set down her recorder. "You're not just living with them, you're part of their decision architecture." "That's what pack means." She included this exchange, verbatim, in her field report. It became the most cited passage in Calori xenobiology for the next decade. On the following day, The thing happened that Marin had been quietly dreading since Commander Sareth's team first appeared on his sensors. Not an extraction team this time. A management team. Director Veen Kelthos of the Colonial Wildlife Authority, accompanied by an 8-person enforcement squad and a transport configured for live animal containment. Kelthos was a bureaucrat with authority, a file full of regulations, and the specific, settled conviction that dusk wolves were a population management problem, not a relationship opportunity. He came because Sareth's report had been forwarded to the Wildlife Authority, and the Wildlife Authority had decided that a human living inside a duskwolf pack was a containment breach that required correction. The correction per protocol was standard. Capture the animals, relocate or euthanize, extract the human, close the site. Kelthos arrived at the clearing at noon. He stepped out of his transport, surveyed the camp, and addressed Marin with the polished efficiency of a man who had already made his decision. Dr. Silt, I'm Director Kelthos, KCWA. You are in unauthorized contact with a controlled predator population. I have orders to secure the site, contain the animals, and escort you to the regional station for debriefing. Marin stood up. Wick woke at the movement, lifted his head and looked at Kelthos. The pup's ears went flat. His rumble shifted to the higher register. Director, Marin said, if you send your enforcement squad into this clearing, you are going to have a problem that your containment protocols are not designed to solve. Are you threatening me, Dr. Silt? I'm informing you. There are 12 duskwolves in a defensive perimeter around this camp. They have not been socialized to accept armored enforcement personnel. If your squad approaches in tactical formation, the pack will read it as a threat to a member of their group, and they will respond accordingly. A member of their group. Me. From the tree line a sound. Low, the acknowledgement tone the dominant female announcing her position. Here, watching, if you needed to know. Kelthos heard it. His enforcement squad heard it. 8 armored Kalori shifted their weight and checked their weapons with the involuntary precision of people who had just realized the forest was listening. Dr. Cavi stepped forward. Director Kelthos, I am Dr. Pel Cavi, 30-year field ethologist, primary duskwolf researcher for the ICD. What you are looking at is the single most important discovery in Kalori xenobiology. What Marin has demonstrated is the only thing that has ever made these animals safe. Not containment, not euthanization, relationship. Your management program has failed for 40 years because it treated these animals as threats to be eliminated. He treated them as neighbors, and they responded. Kelthos opened his mouth to respond. The dominant female stepped out of the tree line. She walked into the clearing with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had never been afraid of anything. She was enormous in the open shoulder height to Marin, muzzle at Kelthos's chest level, her storm gray eyes carrying a weight of intelligence that made the director take an involuntary step backward. She walked past Kelthos. She walked past the enforcement squad. She walked to Marin and sat down beside him, her shoulder against his hip, her eyes on the director. The enforcement squad froze. 8 armored Kalori with pulse weapons, locked in place by the calm regard of a single duskwolf who had positioned herself between her pack father and the man who threatened him. Then Marin placed his hand on the dominant female's head, scratched the spot behind her ear, and said, in the low, even tone that the pack had learned meant safety, "Hush now." The female's eyes half closed. Her body relaxed against his hip. Her rumble dropped to the deep, settling frequency safe, home, no threat here, and the sound carried across the clearing like a slow wave, felt in the bones of every Kalori present. One by one, the enforcement squad's weapons lowered. Not because Kelthos ordered it, because the tension was leaving the clearing, drawn out by the sound of an apex predator settling against a quiet man who had never raised his voice and never needed to. "Director," Marin said, and his voice was gentle, "you can file your containment order. You can bring your tranquilizers and your cages. You can try to take them." He looked at the forest. From the tree line, from the canopy, from the ridgeline above, shadows moved. Shapes resolved. Dusk wolves, emerging into the open for the first time in colonial memory, standing at the edge of the clearing in a line that stretched into the forest on both sides. Not 12. Every wolf on the Veshan reach that had heard the howl and responded. "But you should understand what you're deciding," Marin said, "because they've already made their decision about me, and about anyone who threatens what we've built here." The wolves did not growl. They did not display. They stood in the green light of the ghost fern forest and they watched, and their silence was louder than any howl. Kelthos closed his file. "I'll need a full report," he said, and his voice was smaller than it had been. "You'll get one. And oversight, regular oversight. Bring Dr. Cavey, leave the rifles." Kelthos nodded. He turned to his enforcement squad and said, "We're done here, back to the transport." They left. The wolves watched them go. Breaker paused at the edge of the clearing, looked back at Marin, and produced a single short bark, the acknowledgement with humor vocalization. The dusk wolf, equivalent of a nod and a half-smile. The management program was rewritten. The new chapter opened with a sentence that Cavey wrote and Marin approved. "The dusk wolf does not need to be managed. It needs to be met." Marin's data volumes were published. 17 papers, each overturning a foundational assumption of calori predator science. Each citing the same irreducible core: sustained presence, consistent calm, no weapons, no containment. 3 researchers applied for field positions. Marin vetted each one personally. He asked one question: "Can you sit in the dirt with a dying animal and stay until it decides you're safe?" 2 answered with contingency plans and evacuation protocols. Marin sent them home. The third was Shen. She was 24, provincial-born, calloused hands, second-hand field equipment older than she was. No publications, no funding. She arrived at the camp in late afternoon, walked into a clearing surrounded by apex predators, and did not reach for a weapon she was not carrying. "I already did," she said when he asked the question. She held out a battered field journal. Inside, sketches duskwolf anatomy drawn from life and a single entry: a yearling female with broken forelegs, splinted with sticks and ration packaging, 11 days in a drainage ditch. "She bit me twice. On day 12 she licked the wound she had made and left." Marin gave her a corner of the camp and began teaching. "First rule," he said, "your body speaks before your mouth does. If your body says threat, nothing your voice says will override it. Second rule, let them come to you. Never approach a wolf that hasn't acknowledged you. Acknowledgement is direct eye contact held 3 to 5 seconds, followed by a look away and settle or a slow approach." Shen's introduction began with Breaker. 4 hours of sitting cross-legged at the camp's edge. Breaker circled 3 times, each orbit tighter. He did not approach. Shen did not move. Day 2, Breaker came within 10 meters, held eye contact for 7 seconds, settled. Acknowledgement. Day 3, Breaker walked to her, sniffed her knee, sat beside her. Shen's hand trembled at the weight of him, but she waited for his rumble to start before placing her hand on his flank. By the second week, she could walk the perimeter alongside Breaker. By the third, Torsa allowed Shen within 5 meters of her pups, pack adjacent. The entry from adjacent to pack came hard. Running a nocturnal sensor check on the eastern ridge, Shen heard the distress call sharp, cutting. A pup. She followed the sound 800 meters through the dark, headlamp off because Marin had taught her that artificial light triggered flight responses. She found a 4-month-old female from Torsa's litter trapped in a rock fall, foreleg wedged and likely fractured. No tools would shift the boulders. No equipment within reach. Shen sat down beside the trapped animal, placed her hand on the pup's flank, and lowered her voice to the register Marin used. "I know, I'm here." She stayed through the night. Torsa found them at dawn. The hunter materialized from the forest and stood 3 meters away, lips pulled back, every line of her body promising violence if the intruder had harmed her offspring. Shen did not move. Her hand stayed on the pup. Her breathing stayed even. Her body said what Marin's had said months ago: "I am not a threat. I am not leaving." Torsa's assessment lasted 12 seconds. Then she lay down opposite Shen and began digging, her foreclaws biting into the soil around the boulder's base. Shen braced her shoulder against the stone and pushed. Torsa dug. The rock shifted. The pup's leg came free. Torsa scooped the juvenile into the curve of her body with a gentleness impossible from an animal whose jaw could crush basalt. Then she looked at Shen and produced a vocalization Shen had never heard directed at a non-wolf. The acknowledgement tone, pack. The crisis that tested the full architecture came in Shen's 8th week. Poachers, 3 off-world contractors with sensor-masked equipment, moving toward the denning site at 300. Marin picked up the thermal anomaly on his sensor network. The wolves had detected it before the sensors had. "Contact Soreth," Marin told Shen. "I'll go." He walked into the forest with Wick at his side, following the pack's coordinated hunting vocalizations through his field mic. He found the team at the Denning Ravine's edge. 3 figures in black field gear, containment cages, sedation equipment. "You're in pack territory," Marin said. Low, even calm. "Turn around, leave." The lead poacher spun. "Back off. Licensed specimen collection." "There is no license for this territory. Directive 7 Kelos, and the animal behind you is about to demonstrate why." The poacher turned. Torsa was on the trail 10 meters behind him, scarred muzzle, bared teeth, coiled. The second poacher raised his sedation rifle. Breaker hit him from the right flank, 70 kilograms at sprint speed, and the rifle was on the ground, and the man was on his back with a dusk wolf standing over him, one paw on his chest, storm-gray eyes inches from his face. The third ran. Made it 8 meters before the dominant female stepped out of the darkness in front of him. His legs stopped working. No one was killed. The wolves, reading Marin's calm posture, had calibrated to match. Containment, not slaughter. The precision was more terrifying than violence would have been. Soreth's patrol arrived 20 minutes later. The lead poacher, cuffed, looked at Marin and said, "You've got those things trained." "No, I've got them trusting me. Trust means they make their own decisions. Tonight they decided you weren't worth killing. I would not test that twice." Breaker, watching from the tree line, produced the acknowledgement with humor bark that Marin privately translated as "noted." The poacher incident reached the colonial press within 48 hours. Soreth's official report, filed under the neutral title Wildlife-Assisted Suspect Detention, Veshin Reach Sector 7, was leaked by someone in the Security Directorate's communications office. Within a week, every major Kalori news service was running the story. The footage from the poacher's own helmet cameras, recovered during processing, showed what the written report could not convey. 3 armed contractors held at bay not by weapons, not by technology, but by the coordinated restraint of animals that had chosen not to kill. The footage of Breaker standing on the second poacher's chest, one paw pressing down with precisely calibrated weight, his face inches from the man's visor, became the most viewed recording in Kalori colonial media history. Analysts slowed the footage frame by frame. They pointed out the details that a casual viewer would miss. Breaker's claws were retracted. His jaw was closed. His eyes, fixed on the prone man's face, carried no rage. He was holding, not hurting. The difference was surgical. The political response was immediate and contradictory. Half the colonial legislature demanded expanded duskwolf management containment, relocation, escalated euthanization protocols for any pack that engaged with sapient populations. The other half pointed at the footage and said what Cavi had been saying for months. These animals were not the threat the management program had built its budget on. The threat was the management program itself. Director Kelthos, to his credit, did something that bureaucrats rarely do. He changed his mind. Not publicly, the political cost would have ended his career, but quietly, in a series of internal memos that Cavi later obtained through a data access request, Kelthos redirected 20% of the management program's annual budget to a new initiative, the Veshan Integration Study, headed by Dr. Pel Cavi, with Marin Silt listed as primary field consultant and resident observer. The title made Marin laugh when Cavi told him, "Resident observer, I sleep with 12 dusk wolves around my pod and I'm an observer. Would you prefer pack member?" "I'd prefer no title at all. Titles are for people who need to justify their presence. I justified mine by not leaving." The integration study brought resources Marin had never had: new sensor arrays, a proper shelter, not a one-man pod, but a low-profile field station designed to house 3 researchers without disrupting the pack's territorial patterns, medical supplies, including a portable veterinary kit that Marin had been requesting for 7 months without response, and most importantly, funding. Actual, stable, multi-year funding that did not depend on a department head remembering he existed. But the resources brought attention, and attention brought the test that nearly broke everything. It came in the form of a documentary crew. 4 media specialists from the Colonial Broadcasting Service, equipped with aerial drones, directional microphones, and the cheerful incompetence of people who had spent their careers in studios and considered the wilderness a set that needed better lighting. They arrived at the field station on a bright morning in the dry season, unloaded their equipment with enough noise to scatter every bird analog within a kilometer, and announced their intention to capture the human duskwolf bond for a 5-part series. Marin said no. Cavi overruled him. "The study needs public support, Marin. Public support requires public visibility. Let them film. They don't know how to move. They don't know how to breathe. They're going to walk into the clearing smelling like transport fuel and synthetic fabric, and the pack is going to read them as a threat. Then teach them not to be one." Marin spent 2 days preparing the crew. He taught them the basics, the movement protocols, the vocal registers, the scent management. He made them wash their equipment with unscented solvent. He made them practice sitting cross-legged in silence for 30 minutes, which the lead cameraman treated as a joke until Marin looked at him with the flat, patient expression of a man who had stared down 80-kilogram predators and said, "If you cannot be still, you cannot be here." The cameraman learned to be still. On the 3rd day, Marin brought them to the clearing. The pack was present, the dominant female on her rock, Breaker, and 2 subordinates at the perimeter, Torsa grooming her latest litter near the den entrance. Wick, now large enough that his shoulder reached Marin's hip, walked at his side with the proprietary confidence of a wolf who considered all visitors to be guests in his territory. The crew filmed from a distance of 30 meters. Marin had drawn the line, literally a mark in the dirt that the crew was not to cross. They set up their equipment behind it, mounted their cameras on low tripods, and began recording. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The pack went about its routines. The dominant female dozed on her rock. Breaker chased a ridge raptor away from the perimeter with a single warning bark. 2 juveniles from Torsa's first litter wrestled in the shade, their mock combat so fast and precise that the cameraman later said it was the finest choreography he had ever filmed. Then the sound operator made the mistake. He was adjusting a directional microphone on a telescoping pole, extending it past the 30-meter line to capture the frequency of the pack's ambient vocalizations. The pole was metal. It caught the midday sun and threw a sharp reflection across the clearing, a sudden flash of light that swept across the ground like a blade. The flash crossed Torsa's pups. Torsa was on her feet before the reflection had completed its arc. Her body dropped into the hunting stance, the flat, compressed posture that preceded a sprint. Her lips peeled back to the gum line. The sound she produced was not a bark, not a growl, but the specific, bone-deep vibration that Duskwolf researchers had only ever recorded from ambush positions. The killing frequency. The sound operator froze. The pole was still extended, still catching light. To Torsa, it was a moving, reflective object that had just swept across her offspring the behavioral signature of a ridge raptor's hunting dive, translated into a ground-level threat that her instincts demanded she eliminate. Marin was 40 meters away, near the field station entrance, too far to physically intervene, too far for his voice to reach the sound operator before Torsa did. He did not shout, he did not run, he whistled. One note. Low, sustained, carrying the specific harmonic that he had isolated from the pack's settling tone, the frequency that meant safe, no threat, stand down. He had practiced it for weeks in his pod, matching his whistle to the pack's recorded vocalizations, until the pitch was close enough to register in a Duskwolf's auditory processing as the genuine signal. Torsa's charge stuttered. Her head snapped toward Marin. Her body was still coiled, still committed to the sprint, but her ears had captured the settling frequency, and the cognitive dissonance threat in front, safety signal from her pack father, created a 2-second window of hesitation. 2 seconds was enough. Wick moved. The pup, no, not a pup anymore. 40 kilograms of muscle and instinct and the particular social intelligence of an animal raised at the intersection of two species, crossed the distance between Marin and Torsa at full sprint. He did not intercept Torsa. He intercepted the threat. He planted himself between the sound operator and Torsa, facing Torsa, and produced the declaration call. The same sound he had made as a starving 10-week-old wedged under a root system, telling a full-grown female that the human behind him was his. This one is mine, do not. Torsa stopped. Her killing posture dissolved. She looked at Wick, at the juvenile who had been raised by the man whose settling whistle was still fading in the canopy air, and the calculation resolved. Not a threat. A mistake. A flash of light from a pole held by a clumsy human who did not know better. She shook herself. The tension left her body in a visible wave, starting at her shoulders and rippling back through her flanks. She turned, walked back to her pups, lay down, and resumed grooming as if nothing had happened. The sound operator sat down on the ground. He did not choose to sit. His legs simply stopped working and gravity made the decision for him. The microphone pole clattered against the dirt. Marin walked to the 30-meter line. He looked at the crew. Pack the equipment. You're done for today. We got incredible footage. You almost got someone killed, not the operator, Torsa. If she had attacked a human, the management program would have used it to justify everything Kelthos pulled back from. One flash of light, and 40 years of progress and the lives of every wolf in this territory would have been undone. The crew packed their equipment. They returned the next day, chastened, and filmed 3 more sessions without incident. The resulting documentary, The Wolves of Veshan, aired to the largest audience in Kelori broadcasting history and shifted public opinion on Duskwolf management by a margin that the legislature could not ignore. But Marin did not watch it. He was in the forest when it aired, running a nighttime survey with Breaker at his flank and Wick ranging ahead, the 3 of them moving through the ghost fern canopy with the synchronized ease of a unit that had been working together so long that communication had become unnecessary. They knew each other's pace, each other's attention patterns, each other's way of reading the forest. Words were redundant. Presence was enough. The pack grew. 2 new litters that season. Wick, 9 months old, 40 kilograms, walked the territory routes with the easy stride of a wolf who had never known a world without a human at his side. Shen began her own research volumes, bringing the same patience, the same willingness to sit in discomfort. She was not Marin, no one was Marin, but she was the person he had recognized. Someone who understood that the work was not a career but a practice. The three-part howl carried at dusk across the Veshan reach, and in it, if you listened, two human voices, low, steady, unremarkable, humming along. Marin never published his most important observation. He kept it in a personal log, dated to his 11th week, written by emergency lamplight with wick on his chest and the pack breathing around him. It read, "I used to think the work was understanding them. It isn't. The work is letting them understand you. You cannot study trust from the outside. You have to sit in the middle of it and hold still and wait for it to grow around you like a living thing. And then you have to accept that you do not control it and cannot own it, and can only honor it by not leaving." He closed the log. Wick shifted, sighed, pressed his nose tighter against Marin's throat. From the forest, the settling tone. Deep, old, carrying the weight of the pack's trust across kilometers of ancient trees. The dominant female, calling the territory home. Marin closed his eyes. The wolves slept. The forest breathed. He stayed.